Heritage International Headquarters in Fort Mill, South Carolina. This is Prophetic Perspectives on Current Events with Rick Joyner.
Welcome to Prophetic Perspectives on Current Events. And I hope you caught our last program. If you didn't, you can still be a Christian, but it's not going to be as easy. You need to go back and watch that program. But really, I just began to talk about some of the challenging times, but also incredible opportunities we have right now. Both are coming at the same time. Challenges and opportunities. And as I've mentioned a number of times, in one of the Chinese dialects, they use the same word for crisis that they use for opportunity. And I do believe that is true. And, you know, I know there are a lot of things on our radar screen that look like unprecedented problems and crises that are coming down on us. And, you know, a friend of ours, a real good friend of ours you may have met around Morningstar if you've been around here much, Rick Eldridge, produced that movie on the 4 Blood Moons. And he... you know, is a remarkable movie. I'm sorry if you didn't get a chance to see it. They've only shown it 2 days in the theaters all across the country. Both times it sold out fast, and but it's going to be available through other means. But you got to see it. I mean, he did a remarkable job as fast as he had to put that together. But if you haven't seen the movie, it just does such a great job explaining the prophecy of the blood moons. And I'll just review that for you briefly, but there have been 4 times in history when what are called the blood moons, when there's a certain angle that the earth gets between the moon and the sun, and it makes the moon look like it's been turned to blood. It turns red. And of course, we see that in the book of Revelation when it speaks about the time when the moon turns to blood. And only 4 times in history have those blood moons happened on the Jewish high feast days. And the first time was 1493, right after Columbus discovered America. And of course you thought, well, he missed a year. It should have happened on 1492. That's the important date. You know, God, sometimes some of the things on God's calendar and his timetable, he sees things very differently than we do. Guess what? He knew America was here all along. Obviously, the Native Americans who are here, they'd been here a long time. And now we know through DNA testing and all, the Native Americans came from Mongolia. It had been discovered a long time ago and settled by people from Mongolia. And but 1493 was when the Jews were expelled from Spain during the Inquisition. And many of them went on Columbus's next journey to America. And anyway, it was a major day in Jewish history, and I believe our history. Next time these same blood moons fall on the Jewish feast days was, you know, in 1948 when Israel became a nation. Then the third time was in 1967 when Israel retook Jerusalem. And it was no longer, many believe that was the fulfillment of when it is no longer trodden underfoot of the Gentiles. I debate that, but anyway, it was a major thing that happened in Israel's history and in world history when the Jewish state of Israel retook Jerusalem. And then the 4th time is this year, 2015. It's the 4th time in history this has happened where the blood moons appear on the Jewish feast days. And astronomers are saying for as far as they can see into the future, they don't see this ever happening again. They only see that it happened 4 times and will never happen again. So, of course, everybody's wondering what in the world is going to happen in 2015, this year, And of course, the last blood moon where this happens is this coming fall, this autumn. And it'll be the last one. Now, people who are completely disconnected from the prophecies of the blood moons, and there is a lot of speculation about what's going to happen. But all I know, there's one thing that we call prophetic chatter. Now, one of the ways our intelligence services can forecast terrorist attacks and things is by the chatter they pick up from terrorist sources. All of a sudden, the communications rise. They know something's about to happen. And we kind of parallel that with what we call prophetic chatter. All of a sudden, prophetic people are saying something's going on. And you wish that they could be more specific. I wish that we could be more specific. God only reveals in part. And most unfortunately, many try to be more specific with their own conclusions, and they usually miss because of that. But I have, an incredible amount of prophetic chatter is going on right now that something major is coming in the fourth quarter of this year, which will coincide with the last blood moon. This was going on long before the blood moon prophecies became popular. And I don't believe there was a direct connection. Now, I was recently, in fact, just 2 days ago, I was in a council in Dallas where they pulled together people who are experts in many different fields, and from security policy, the military, defense, to the economy. Some of the greatest economists, probably the most knowledgeable economists maybe alive today, could have been in that room. Just amazing people in just about in many key fields. And this was about putting together a council, kind of like Winston Churchill's shadow cabinet. Now, this group is not trying to be any kind of cabinet or anything, but just to come up with first identifying the ultimate crises that we're facing as a nation, and then to propose workable, practical solutions for each one. And for our next president to have these potential solutions at his or her disposal, that this crisis is coming down, this is what we can do to fix this. It's kind of, it's not partisan. It's just, we believe our nation is in jeopardy. And these are some of the best and the brightest that have been a part of different administrations. Quite a remarkable group together. And all of them were saying, we're not going to make it through this fourth quarter without something major happening. From their perspective. From the perspective of terrorist attacks, from the perspective of the economic challenges we're expecting. I mean, across the board, it was like everybody was pointing to the fourth quarter. Many people in that room had no knowledge of what's going on prophetically. Now, I was in there as kind of a representing, they thought, anyway, I was kind of representing evangelical church. There were other evangelical Christians in the room, but they were representing other aspects of this thing. But a number of our board members from the Oak Initiative were in there. There were only about 20 people in this room. And for 2 days, we just hashed stuff out. It was great. And then our friend Nigel Big Pond summed it all up. Yeah, hopefully you've met Nigel or seen him here. And truly a remarkable man. I call him the happiest Indian I've ever met in my life. He's always happy. He's just full of the joy of the Lord. He loves God. But he summed everything up by saying, welcome to the reservation. We've been living under this for, a century or more now. And everything you're talking about happened. There were those talking about how, our Constitution's not honored. Well, they're saying, we thought we had a treaty. None of it was honored. Everything that was promised us, none of it came through. And and how the last conclusion of it was all of a sudden, America is like in the same place the reservations have been in for a long time. And that's their world. And Nigel's just saying, hey, this is normal life. We don't trust governments anymore because they've never kept their word to us. You know, not a single treaty made to the Native Americans was ever kept. Not even one. Maybe some of them a little bit. But everything they were told and promised turned out to be the opposite. And they learned after a while, every new treaty was for the purpose of more control on them and their lives, and depriving them of more property and more of their rights and everything else. And that's the way almost every new law being passed is encroaching on our freedoms and taking our property, taking our resources, taking our freedoms. But they've been, that's what they've been going through. But, Nigel did a much better job of explaining what it means to live on the reservation. And everybody was just stunned. They said, we really couldn't go on after he shared that night. Lance Wallnow was supposed to share after him. Lance said, I am not going to say anything after that. He said, I can't talk after that. And we don't need to say anything else tonight. And I told Nigel years before, I'm 1/16th Cherokee. Personally, a great-grandmother was full Cherokee Indian, so me and 15 other people would make one good Indian, or 15 other like me. Nigel's an awesome guy, but he just summed it up. And I wonder about, are we not reaping what we've sown for what we've done to the Native Americans? I remember one time my wife and I were having dinner with this Polish countess, and Lady Blanka Rosenstiel. She had been from an incredibly wealthy family from Poland, and her parents had gotten their wealth out of Poland before the Nazis invaded in 1938 or 39. And she's a very wealthy woman. She's a member of the council that awards our Medal of Freedom and things like that. And she was hosting these big events, and she would have, former presidents. I know General Schwarzkopf, who led the first Iraq War, and many others like that would be her guest of honor at this. And then they would bring in Indian chiefs just to honor. And I said, really? Wow. How are you from Poland, a Polish immigrant, in touch with what's going on with our Native Americans? She rolled out this big map to my wife and I. And she had her staff draw this up, a map of America where every Indian tribe in America was. And there are about 600 tribes. And she had listed on this, and she had them do the research, and she had researched all of the atrocities done against every tribe. And she said, if we don't fix this, she says, I'm an American now by choice. I came to America. I'm an American citizen. She's actually became one of our leading citizens. And she says, but I know we've got to fix this with them, or we will lose everything we've got. We're going to lose our freedom. We're going to have done to us what was done to them. We've got to fix this. And in her only way she knew how to do was have these giant events and invite the local chiefs in to be the guest of honor. When some of the most esteemed and powerful people in our country were there, she would honor the chiefs. And just as way she said, I'm only doing what I know to do, but I know we've got to make this right. I do believe that. I believe that too. I know when we got our property here at Heritage, I went to the local chief whose tribe had owned this land, and a huge chunk of land from North and South Carolina had been taken from this tribe, just seized and taken away from them. And so the only thing I knew to do was to go with a sin offering. I took a silver box full of silver, and we had a ceremony. And Nigel came and helped us. Nigel Big Pond came and helped us. And I just said, look, all I want to do is apologize for what's been done to you and your tribe and in history. And I know we're on land, and we ask your permission, land that was yours and unlawfully taken from you. We ask for your permission to do what we're going to do on this land. And he was a great Christian man. He was so appreciative that we would acknowledge all that. But then he said, of course. And we had a big ceremony here, and he blessed us, gave us their blessing, tribal blessing and everything. I really knew we had to get that if we're going to do what we had here. And all the wrong, we tried to then go back to the PTL members who had invested so much, and we didn't know what to do. But you have to do something to try to make things right, especially these great, terrible cultural wounds. And, we have that case in 2 Samuel 13, where, not 2 Samuel, 2 Kings, where, a famine came on the land during the times of David. And David inquired of the Lord, why has this famine come upon us? He said, because of Saul and his bloody house, because he killed the Gibeonites. And that David didn't do that. His generation didn't do that. It was a previous generation, but David had to go and make it right to lift the curse off the land. The shedding of innocent blood brings a curse. Do you know where the first concentration camp, maybe in world history, was? Possibly the first concentration camp in history was in Wilkesboro, North Carolina, about 5 miles from our Moravian Falls community. I've been to the fields. I know the fields where it was, where they first started gathering the Cherokee Indians and the other tribes in this region, and then they moved them to Georgia and began what is now called the Trail of Tears, but it actually began in Wilkesboro, North Carolina, as the first gathering place. And if you've ever studied the Trail of Tears and what was done to these Native Americans, and when they gave them blankets infected with smallpox and everything else just to kill them on this thing. And this was done by our country, by our government. Actually, a lot of it was Andrew Jackson, one of our esteemed and honored presidents, the 7th president of the United States. This guy was not a good guy. And, of course, at the time, Indians, the Native Americans were attacking colonists. All kinds of atrocities were going on both sides. But that doesn't justify us responding with atrocities. And what was done to them as a people group and trying to wipe out an entire people group started here. That was as bad. May not have been as big as what took place in Germany in the 30s. And what's going on under ISIS now. And even worse things than that took place in the Middle Ages. But I still think we've got to acknowledge them, or we'll never learn from them. They'll keep happening. Those who don't learn from history are doomed to repeat it. So we need to know our history, need to acknowledge it, and sometimes go back and make amends. What do we do because of all the broken treaties with the Indians? Well, we say, well, they're not doing bad. They all have their own casinos now and everything else. But listen, what was done is terrible. It doesn't matter how well they're doing now, and that's not true. A handful are doing good. Maybe financially, they're not doing good in many other ways. But through Nijo and many others, there is a great unity that's taking place among the tribes right now. Maybe an unprecedented unity. I'm praying the same thing will happen in the body of Christ here. But I think there's some things we've got to do. If the Lord made David go back and fix what had happened, this previous wound, it was not healing. It would have been a perpetual cultural wound in the midst of their nation if they did not address it. Wounds don't heal with time. They've got to be cleansed and then closed. And then kept, with antiseptic, whatever, to keep the germs and the infection away until they've healed up. And we've got to do the same. But along with, maybe we really need to take a hard look at what's going on with the Native Americans and see what we can do to make this right. I know many have been trying and been doing a lot for a long time. This is no new thing and no new call, but I'm making it again. That, maybe that would help begin healing in many other areas. At least get the Lord to see how serious we are, to appeal to the Lord to help us through all of these things that are emerging in our nation right now. They're all fixable, easily fixable by the power of the cross. We don't have to do what David did to heal the issue with the Gibeonites. We've got the power of the cross, but we've got to go to the cross. And I believe that begins with us acknowledging our need for the cross, our need for what Jesus did on the cross. We'll be right back. Well, we've been talking about a lot of issues, and I know on a program like this, all I can do is stir your interest. And we're hoping to get back into where we're taping and really being able to dig down and go deep into some of these issues. But, you know, I think the first thing we got to do is wake up and get engaged. And I think that's happening. I think the church in America is starting to wake up now. A lot of us have a concept, when we think church, we think everybody. I don't think you can really count the church in America as being everybody who calls themselves a Christian. In fact, I believe it'd probably be closer to 10% of those who call themselves as Christians. Now, I'm just saying, I don't want to dig into that either, but it's a much smaller percentage according to the biblical definition of the followers of Jesus. But I think that's going to change. It's going to change. But you know what? It doesn't take a big percentage. And, you know, this is one of the things I've tried to get across to people, especially when I'm in what I call political circles, where people are thinking politically and political solutions, and we've got to get the majority behind us, and how are we going to win over this group or that group? I don't believe we need to. I think that's actually a distraction, a deception. You know, one of the things that, you know, if you ever read books like Gladwell's Tipping Points and the many other great books on this subject, but studies have been made. I mean, scientific studies have concluded that the percentage of people required to bring profound cultural change is less than the square root of 1% of the population. Less than the square root of 1% of the population. That's an amazing number. That means any 100 people, any church of 100 people should be able to radically, profoundly change the culture of their city of 1 million people. We got way more people than we need to radically, profoundly change the culture and the trajectory of our nation, of all the nations. Right now, if we take just 10% of those who claim to be Christians really are, then we got still way too many to do this. And, you know, those who have made radical, profound transformations have understood this. Karl Marx, he claimed, you know, a tiny percentage, he either said 2 or 4% of the passionate will control the 98% who were indifferent. And this was proven when the Bolsheviks, just 20,000 Bolsheviks, took over Russia, a nation of millions and millions. And, but we have a better example of that with Jesus just saying, look what I can do with just 12 people. Give me 12 good people. I'll turn the world upside down. Really, only one person in God is plenty. The whole job can get done. My point here is we don't need to keep looking at big numbers. And, you know, I think it's our human nature, not our spiritual nature, but our human nature to get more encouraged the more people that come with us, that follow us or side with us or come to our church or whatever. I think that's a big mistake, just as I am trying to let the political people I know understand it's a mistake to always be looking for the people. When the people came to make Jesus king, he fled to the mountains, it says. What's going to happen if the people make you king? Who's going to rule if the people make you king? Jesus wasn't going to have any of that. They couldn't make him king. He was born king. He got his authority from above, not below. I think we've got to understand that. John Calvin in Geneva, he was a refugee from France, wasn't even a Swiss citizen, had so much authority, he never held a public position, no public office, but no law would be passed without his approval. He had such incredible moral and spiritual authority. That sounds like a lot better to me than being the president or being somebody else. To just have the authority. Well, they're going to come to you for your opinion, and whatever you say is going to rule. And but he had that kind of authority in Geneva. And sometimes I think we're distracted and deceived by looking for authority from the people instead of from above. Now, just a few months ago, I got jolted by something the Lord said to me. And just taking that little, wherever 2 or 3 are gathered, there he will be in the midst. And I've been the Lord, I'm actually not too far away from having been a Christian for half a century. And I had always misunderstood that. I had always looked at it, well, if there are just 2 or 3, he'll be there. He said, you don't understand. You only want 2 or 3 at the beginning. I'll be there. If you'll get it down to 2 or 3, I'll be there in your midst. I was shocked. He said, if you start getting more than that, you're not going to see me. You're going to be looking at each other. And I think that's proven to be true. Now, I believe things need to grow beyond that. You need to get bigger. But, many of us, we just take, for example, trying to bring unity to the church in a city. We'll want to get at least a dozen, maybe 2 dozen of the churches together for some unity event. And that's encouraging if you can get that many. But sometimes I think we miss God because we can't get that many and we think we'll never have unity here. When that was a mistaken strategy. Instead of trying to get all this big group of churches, maybe the big churches behind it or whatever, why not just do it with 1 or 2? 3 at the most. Pastors start getting together and say, we're going to start praying together, getting together, investing in friendships, taking the other pastors out to lunch. But why not just have a unity movement with 2 or 3? 3 at the maximum. I think you're going to see the Lord in the midst of that a whole lot more. And then you know what's going to happen? More are going to want to be a part. But you can see how already you're getting the foundation right on we're going to follow the Lord. He's going to be our head. We see him. He is here now, and we don't want to ever lose his presence in this. I think there are many other things. I know in prayer, Francis Frangipane, our good friend Francis, used to say, in prayer, it's like poker. 4 of a kind beats a full house. We don't need a lot of people. We just need unity. We need a few people in unity. Now, what would happen? We're doing this in the Oak Initiative. This is a major strategy going forward. We're putting together what are called fire teams. And, when I had to go through Marine Corps infantry training, even though I was in the Navy, but they started the most basic unit other than the soldier or the Marine was a fire team. You put 3 people together, made up a fire team. 3 or 4 fire teams made up a squad. Several squads made up a platoon. Several platoons made up a company, etc. That was the basic military unit. And fire teams learned to work together and function together. And you became just knit together because your lives depended on each other. And so instead of trying to start big in some of these things, I think we need to make an effort to start little. And let's don't be so exclusive we don't let other people in when it's time to let them in. But don't be discouraged if your unity movement starts with 2 churches instead of 20. I think you'll have more unity in the end. I think you'll have much more fruit. You'll eventually have more than 20 churches. You'll have probably all of them coming together because it'll be built on the right foundation. Jesus is the head. He's in our midst, and we're not going to do anything to lose him. We're here to follow him. Do you get what I'm saying here? So I just ask you to consider these things. You making an effort yourself just to get with one other person or 2 people once a week for coffee. 2 or 3 people in your church. You don't know what could happen. The Lord loves to do things that way. He loves to make the small confound, overwhelm the large, the weak, the strong. Isn't that the record that we have in his word? So think small, and I've been hearing prophetically from many sources. You probably heard it too, because I've been hearing for years that small is the Lord's next big. I think this is what he's talking about. So just consider that. Consider 1 or 2 other people you can start bonding and knitting together with. Start experiencing true koinonia fellowship with. And let it build. And watch what happens. And watch who gets the glory. Thank you.